Welcome back, everybody, to the Level Up podcast, where we talk to some of the brightest engineering and DevOps leaders about what it takes to build great companies, products, and teams. Today, I'm here with Cai GoGwilt, who is the CTO and co-founder of Ironclad. Ironclad is a digital contracting platform with customers across all verticals, including MasterCard, L'Oreal, DoorDash, and Dropbox. They have grown ferociously, and most recently were valued at $3.2 billion dollars with a $150 million Series E. As a founder, Cai has actually been there since the very beginning, and today we're going to be chatting with Cai about that journey and the ever-evolving role of the non-CEO founder. So Cai, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on. Good to be here.
Yeah. So why don't, to start, tell us a little bit about kind of those early beginnings of Ironclad. Like, how did you and your co-founder Jason meet, and how did you figure out that contract management was this sort of major problem we're solving?
Yeah, for sure. So, starting at the beginning, maybe my background is as a software engineer. So, I was a software engineer at a company called Palantir for a couple of years. Before that, I did my undergraduate and master's work at MIT in computer science and physics. So, after spending a couple of years at Palantir, I left and was looking for the next thing. And my whole reason for being, I guess, or the thing that really motivates me, is helping people be more effective at what they do. With Palantir, that was intelligence analysts trying to prevent the next 9/11. And after Palantir didn't really have access to those intelligence analysts anymore, and started trying to interview professionals doing awesome work, and found myself really enjoying talking to lawyers, which I know is not a common thing. But I really enjoy talking to lawyers. I thought these were people who thought in a very similar way to me in terms of this engineering mindset, except they were engineering contracts rather than engineering computer code. And they also seem like people who are really, really excited about adopting new technology to help them spend more time on legal thought and less time on kind of the mundane pieces of their work. So that's what led me to start to get to know people in the legal technology space. That's what led me to meet Jason Baimig, my co-founder and our CEO. And this was back in 2014. So I think legal tech and contracting tech has become a little bit more of a hot space than it was back in 2014. Back in 2014, I think I got to meet every single person who was interested in legal technology over the span of about 2 months.
Like all of them in the entire world, it was probably a much smaller group.
Like all of them,
Yeah.
and maybe not in the entire world, but certainly in the microcosm that is the San Francisco Bay Area. Yeah, so Jason and I met at a seminar at Stanford, which was held on a biweekly basis, and we got coffee afterwards. We started co-working together, and a few months later, we officially joined forces and created Ironclad.
That's awesome. It was interesting that the observation you made around lawyers have almost a similar craft to software engineers. Something I remember looking at with ops levels on like rounds of financing is, I mean, our financing docs were these like massive, 100 pages or even low thousands of pages. And it's almost like defensive programming. It's like for all the different corner cases that can occur. And I absolutely agree. There's a certain kind of rigor in thinking about what cases could occur, what are the mechanisms and sort of statutes you can apply and ways to get in front of that. And it's very similar to like, okay, and in programming, our interface looks like this and the contract is this and what happens when these things happen.
Yeah, yeah, so many analogies, and also this similar kind of respect for elegant contracts, and in the same way you look at some code and you're like, that's really elegant or really well structured or kind of impossible to decipher, but cool, but also never put that into production, please.
Right.
So yeah, lots of really cool analogies there.
So tell me then, let's talk a little bit about the evolution of that. So you and Jason now are starting co-working. You're the technical founder. I have some assumptions. You were hands in the dirt, writing code, writing the first versions of, Ironclad. Can you talk to us a little bit about what those early days were like, and then the journey that kind of went from there as you hired your first few developers and continued to scale your team?
Yeah, for sure. So maybe to kind of put in context the whole journey, we've been at this for almost 8 years now. or almost exactly 8 years now. And so for probably the first 2 years, or first year and a half, um, I was the sole engineer, the sole person writing code. Jason came from a legal background and a law firm background, so I was also the sole person who had prior experience building any sort of software product. Um, so that was kind of this solo phase, and then I'd say maybe there was kind of the managing phase where we were starting to build up the team after we went through Y Combinator in 2015. After we raised our seed round, we started to bring on more a quality engineer, software engineer, a couple more software engineers, designers, and then so I would kind of call that the second phase, at least from the perspective of my own personal growth. And then I would call the third phase when we brought in our VP engineering, which was very, very early. But Jason Lee has been an absolutely fantastic engineering leader and has been with us, I want to say, the last 6 years now. So it was actually quite soon after I was starting to get used to managing, we brought in, a real engineering leader. And then I would say kind of the phase after that was when I led product and design for actually quite a few years. And that ended in 2020 when we brought on our VP of product. And since then, I would say I'm in this, whatever this phase is, which is back to being an individual contributor. But it's a very, very different flavor from when I started. It's much more partnering with leaders, partnering with teams, trying to help connect the dots. So
Awesome. Yeah, let's talk about maybe some of those, like just to recap. So the first phase was like you as an IC writing the code. The second phase is you've now hired a team, engineers and designers and testers, and you're sort of managing them. Your third phase then was bringing on Jason Lee as your VP of Eng and having him take over the engineering parts, allowing you to focus into product and design, which is the tenure of the fourth phase. And then I'm assuming hiring a VP product and now almost coming back full circle to being an IC again, but with a much kind of loftier view.
yeah, you summarized that much better than I did.
No,
Thank you.
that's so I'd love to kind of dive into like each of those phases and talk about that journey. Like when did how did you kind of adapt to going from, let's say, phase one to phase two, from being that IC to now, okay, hiring other ICs and sort of being their manager and helping them grow as individuals, but also being their PM and helping them figure out like what to build.
Yeah. So I had kind of going from that solo phase to the initial managing phase. I had a lot of learning to do. I had never officially managed anyone before. And so I'm a learn by doing person, but I also love reading. And so I started reading a lot of books on management and particularly engineering management. Reached out to a few people that I knew who could maybe advise me on this kind of thing, and started meeting with an advisor on about a monthly basis. And yeah, it was challenging. The idea of as a individual engineer, I kind of sorry. As an individual engineer transitioning into management, I made, I think, probably all of the mistakes that a new manager makes. One of the mistakes being, using your abilities as an individual contributor to cover for what a team is not able to accomplish, and in so doing, robbing your team of the opportunity to learn and the opportunity to grow. So definitely made that mistake. Definitely made the mistake of prioritizing things I could get done in my individual contributing skill set over things that I needed to get done as a manager. Yeah, so lots of mistakes, but also lots of kind of opportunities to work with advisors who could kind of say, "You're doing the thing that I told you not to do," and books to help me understand how to prioritize my time, how to give feedback in a way that would be better received, how to understand what the dynamic of a one-on-one was, and kind of like go practice going into the mode of doing that. Writing up formal reviews and the importance there, even though the first time it doesn't feel that important. Then 6 months later, you're like, I'm glad that I
I'm glad we
actually did
did
that.
this activity.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It gives us a checkpoint and being able to track how people are progressing. You talked about, one of the examples of failure modes was like using your abilities in IC to kind of, and prioritizing that over kind of management work. Can you give some examples? Like I'm kind of speculating on, I could choose between writing this code or fixing these tests or doing this PR versus helping the team prioritize or helping someone with their growth. But do you have any specific examples from that era?
Yeah. So thinking back a cool 6 or 7 years, um, uh, what's a good example? Very early on, we built our first Salesforce integration, and one of our more junior engineers was on the project. And I remember there was a point where we were making progress there, but uh, you know, there's always pressure from new customers and new prospects for that feature. Um, and I remember making the mistake of going in and essentially like rewriting vast amounts of what this more junior engineer had already built. And in hindsight, that could have been a co-working pair programming opportunity. But with the pressure that I felt from the business, with the time pressure that I felt, and also with my relative discomfort in helping someone else grow compared to the comfort I felt in just building something myself, I he's slipped into that mode, um, and I would say I definitely did that engineer a disservice in doing so, and by extension, the team.
Right. And it sounds also like you've learned from it. What would you say are some of the biggest takeaways? You mentioned, like again, you worked with mentors, you read books. Some of the things you talked on already were like the importance of feedback and cadence of one-on-ones and what that should feel like. Were there any other kind of like key learnings that you're like, oh, this is now my role. I'm not an IC, I'm a manager, and I have to now do this.
Yeah. Um, I think the importance of one-on-ones, and then in those one-on-ones, the importance of how you present yourself. I think there are a lot of there's a lot of temptation during one-on-ones as a new manager. At least I felt the temptation to go through the project that you're working on together or the particular set of features and to kind of use it as almost a stand-up or a status check on a project. But really, like the point of the one-on-one is to be there for them as an individual. Like those status checks, those projects checks, there should be structured time to check in with those people about those things. And if they want to talk about that, that's great. But the point of the one-on-one is, at least in my view, is to hold space for the individual, and to hold space for them to kind of tell you what's going on outside of the things that you usually have to talk about. Um, as part of that, actually, I think, ironically, uh, reading books on like personal relationships has actually like helped in terms of learning how to present during a one-on-one. And in particular, there's a technique called reflecting, which I read in a relationship book called Getting the Love You Want, which is an excellent book for both personal and professional relationships, I think. But and this technique is basically when someone says something, like restate it to them and ask them, like, is this what I'm hearing from you? I think that's really powerful for two reasons. The first is the person saying the thing that you're reflecting back to them is feels heard, and I think that's something that we often take for granted. We say something and we say it to someone else, and they then go on a different tangent, and you're like, "Did you actually hear me?" But when you're the person listening, you're like, in your mind, you're like, I registered it, and now I'm moving on to like the next thing. We don't necessarily take the time to
To
reflect
confirm
back and
that.
say,
Yeah.
yeah. And secondly, it gives the person a chance to say, I didn't actually mean to say that. What I meant to say was this. And sometimes it provides an opportunity for the other person to reflect and realize they didn't want to say that. They didn't want to feel that, and allow them to modify what they said. Or it gives them a chance to understand that what they said was not understood, um, and create space for them to clarify. So, yeah, very, very specific, very specific technique, but I use it all the time, and I find it incredibly helpful.
Nice. I remember I was very fortunate early in my shift from being an IC to a manager. One of the people I look up to said, like, Ken, if you do nothing else as a manager, do one-on-ones, right? So I was like, okay, I got to do one-on-ones. And I also, like you, I kind of geeked out on it and read about like how to do a one-on-one. You know, the techniques I learned were ask a lot of open-ended questions, continue asking why. It's a pulse check, right? For a lot of the points you brought up, it shouldn't be a status meeting. It is trying to get a pulse check. And now years later, I think there's two things I've come to realize. One of them is like that pulse check is so important. I think again, I've been fortunate enough to have people that report to me that are very intellectually honest, that will like, they're not shy about hiding their emotions. And I think I've been able to get in front of retention issues before they became retention issues, because they can kind of see when things are bubbling up. And the second is that I talked about asking why a lot. And I remember like one of my earlier one-on-ones, somebody said to me like, Ken, you're asking me a lot of the same questions my therapist would ask you. I remember specifically it was like they were really down because something was late. Well, why are you down? Because it's late. Like, you know, software can be late. Well, because I have this expectation, you know, about like how I perform. Okay, why do you have that expectation? I'm like, oh, this is almost like at the nexus of like performance and therapy, right? And that's why I loved your analogy there to like books on personal relationships, because I think it is that. It's really about like building that relationship with a person so that, you know, as their leader, you can help equip them to be set up for effective execution. But the way to do that is by ensuring that they kind of understand their emotions and how they respond to different situations at work.
For sure. Yeah, and that pulse check is such a valuable skill, just in general. To your, I mean, maybe jumping ahead a little bit to kind of the future phases, and to some of your questions about like what's next.
Yeah.
I think being able to having that skill to be able to have those one-on-ones, to be able to make sure that you hold space for a pulse check, or for a session of asking why in a way that potentially feels like a therapy session. I think that's really, really helpful. And it was for me, because what was next for me after managing engineering was managing product and design. And I had never been a designer before. And actually, in my tenure at Palantir, there were no product managers. So I'd never even worked with a product manager before. And so suddenly having that grounding of managing engineers in a discipline that I felt very comfortable in, and then going to managing individuals who had disciplines that I had no familiarity with or very little familiarity with, suddenly being able to check in with them, add value, even though I didn't know their craft, was of the utmost importance.
And so what were some ways they actually went about doing that? How did you get up
um,
to speed on their craft, or how did you kind of figure out like, I'm now going to manage people that I don't know the craft for, or haven't had experience managing in the past?
yeah, I think part of it was just having the having a fixed mindset, maybe, about like I will never know their craft. Um, but I would ask everyone for suggestions on ways I could learn about their craft or ways I could better understand what they do. Um, and so, so yeah, I would ask our designers for suggestions on books or suggestions on blog posts or things to help understand like where they were coming from. I'd ask product managers to suggest things that I should read. And then more to the point, I think I would follow through on these suggestions because it's like one thing to say like, hey, like suggest me a book, and then they suggest you a book, and then you never look at it, and then it suddenly feels like you're just asking to ask. So I would follow through and I would read all these books, and actually, uh, you know, I can sort of remember some of the product and design books that I read, but subsequent to that, I was as we started to bring in like design leaders, product leaders, and eventually our VP of product to manage both. I started working even outside of engineering, product, and design, and so I would ask for people for. I've read like books on pricing that were suggested by pricing people. I've read books on account-based marketing that were suggested by ABM people. So uh, yeah, I think that technique has like helped as well there.
Nice. So just really a love of reading and getting, yeah, suggestions on what to read and following through on it.
Yes.
I want to talk about, I think I was phases maybe 2 and 4 or 3 and 4, but when you first hired your VP Eng, and also when you hired your VP product, like the pattern matching I want to observe there is, so you're doing the role, right? You were managing a team and you said, no, I don't know if you decided or the company decided, but talk to us about like that tripwire that was hit where it's like, yeah, we're now going to hire a VP Eng, or we're now going to hire a VP product. Like it is time for me to give these Legos away. How did you kind of know when the right time to do that was?
Yeah. Um, I think that I think it's hard to know yourself when it's time to give away those Legos, as you put it. And I wish I could say that I recognized that it was time for me to like give those Legos up. But I think it was credit goes to Jason, my co-founder, for recognizing that it was probably time to start hiring ahead. And if I look back in hindsight, our VP of engineering search, um, we just got incredibly lucky in many ways. We kind of expected there to be 12 months to find the right person. And there was this feeling like, okay, in 12 months, we could imagine a situation where I'm not scaling as a leader here, or I'm being pulled elsewhere. Uh, and then we found Jason Lee like within a month. And he was just like
Nice.
the perfect person. And and things worked out amazingly well. So I was definitely like pretty suspect when we first started interviewing for our head of engineering, and I remember like knowing that Jason Lee was the right person because in our conversations, I found myself realizing that the kind of engineering team that he wanted to set up, the kind of engineering culture that he wanted to create, was exactly the kind of engineering team and culture that I wanted to be a part of. And so I found myself very quickly with high conviction that like I would want to join Jason Lee. I would want to be on Jason Lee's engineering team. So that gave me a lot of conviction in terms of like partnering with him and just having him shape the engineering culture of
Nice.
Ironclad.
What were some of the hallmarks of that culture? What were the things that you and him kind of mutually agreed on were important to set up as the basis for engineering at Ironclad?
Yeah, I mean, a strong focus on the user, a strong focus on like delivering value to the user. So um, not allowing it to be like super acceptable for engineers to just work on things that don't have a user impact, but instead looking for people and looking for engineers who are going to try to connect their work to beneficial impact to the user. A strong sense of trying to avoid the tragedy of the commons, trying to make sure that everyone contributes to DevOps or platform engineering. Uh, no one is kind of like only in their corner, like everyone is contributing to the team as a whole. And then finally, and this isn't about the team culture, I think this is more about Jason Lee as a leader, the idea of like leading by example. And truly, Jason Lee is the kind of person who's not going to ask anyone to do something that he wouldn't himself like do. And so, yeah, leading by example.
Nice. Yeah, to show, yeah, even as a leader, you're willing to dive in and get your hands sort of in the dirt, or do whatever's necessary to get something over the line.
Yeah.
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 I love that all those values, right? Especially like the first one around kind of like customer empathy, and like, I've definitely met engineers in the past in my career that they love engineering problems, but not necessarily product problems. And especially in a startup, you need product focused engineers, because it's not just, oh, we're gonna need to scale this one system, or we need to deal with large traffic spikes. It's no, we need to ship this feature like that customers are going to use and as a business give us money for.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
As you've kind of grown, throughout engineering and product, something I think a lot about is how to keep your team sort of aligned or pulling in the same direction. Do you have any strategies or techniques that you've thought about or effective ways to help like keep your teams aligned and keep everyone pulling in that same direction?
Yeah. The thing my mind immediately goes to is our company plan. So at Ironclad, we have an annual planning cadence where we set up a number of priorities for the company, and then have kind of like priorities for every single team. And we started doing this back in 2017, I think. So it's been a good number of years that we've had a company plan. And I remember back in 2017 being very, very skeptical of this plan. And yeah, I just thought, as a fast iterating startup, how could we possibly set like a number of goals for an entire year and like project out what the goals would be for that year, when we barely know what like how a feature is going to land in the next like week or something
Right.
like that.
Because a year is forever in startup land. Like
A year is
it's an
forever.
eternity. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But since then, I've become like completely a complete convert to the idea of an annual company plan. I even, to be a super nerd, like wrote up my own like personal annual plan a couple of years ago with all the elements of the company plan: mission, vision, values, priorities, and yeah, getting that discipline back in 2017, which for us was right around our Series A, was absolutely critical, because the growth that we experienced in terms of headcount, having like that touch point of a mission, vision, values, and priorities made it really easy for people to like jump in, start to have context, start to have a framework for communicating like, this is what I see working, this is what I see not working, given that we want to do this for the year. And so I think the value of stating where you think you're going to go in the next year, even if it isn't where you go, and even if midway through the year you have to change one of the priorities or something like that, the value is in creating a framework that new teammates can come in and communicate with you about what they think needs to happen or how they think things need to change. So that's probably the main tip that I have in terms of alignment. Having that annual company plan, realizing that you can still have the flexibility and agility to respond to like the market as it changes, or to respond to your particular user needs as they change. But putting forethought into a plan and a framework so that newcomers to your team can like immediately feel like they understand at least a framework to learn more and to be effective.
Right. It sounds like it's been a good place just to be able to focus on what's important versus what's not.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. The things that are not on the company plan are almost just as important as the things that are on the company plan. because if they're not there, then maybe a fantastic idea, but hopefully you're at a company where it feels like green fields in every direction. And if everyone runs in different directions because every opportunity seems great, then you're likely going to fail because you
Right.
should probably all be running in the same direction.
That's
Um,
that's just it.
I would say
Uh, oh, go ahead.
I would say a second framework that I might offer that we found useful for a number of years and don't really use anymore, but is the idea of bucketing different buckets of work. And I think this really started to fall apart for us when we reached, say, like 100 people. But until that time, it was somewhat useful. And it's like very basic. It's just as an engineering, product, and design organization, how much time do we want to spend on kind of new feature development? How much time do we want to spend on one-off requests? And if you're in enterprise SaaS, you probably have some one-off requests. How much time do we want to spend on kind of investing in the maintenance and the platform? And how much do we want to invest in like Horizon 2, Horizon 3 projects that may not have an impact right now, the market's maybe not necessarily looking for? And so we set these percentages at, we wanted to spend only 5% of our time on enterprise one-off requests and things like that. We wanted to spend 10% of our time investing in ourselves and our infrastructure, paying down tech debt, adopting new systems that would help us work faster, et cetera. We wanted to spend, what are we at, 15? We wanted to spend, I think, 35% of our time on like feature requests that would immediately impact multiple customers. And then we want to spend 50% of our time on like longer term bets, Horizon 2, Horizon 3 things that we thought were going to impact the business. And part of the reason for doing this, the percentages almost don't matter. And we didn't really we had like some ways of kind of tracking towards those things, but like agreeing as a team, this is what we want to do, and was like super, super helpful. It gave a lot of people the framework to argue and advocate for certain investments, especially around kind of, should we upgrade this library? Should we move off of Heroku now? Like
Right.
that kind of stuff. And we could kind of frame it as like, how much of that 10% of investing in our infrastructure, investing in our team dynamics, et cetera, is this going to take up? And is it the right thing to do, or should we be doing this other thing that's in that same bucket? Because it's really hard to compare things like, should we move off of Heroku with like, should we deliver the Salesforce integration
Right.
that a customer is demanding for yesterday? So yeah. And then it also helped us also balance kind of the immediate feature requests with the kind of like Horizon 2, Horizon 3 investments that where the payoff wasn't as necessarily clear. And you can play with this framework in a number of different ways. You can kind of like, as the team grows, think about having one engineer per team on one of the buckets, or you can think about like how many engineers are staffed on kind of like system support per week, because maybe that's part of the 5% of like one-off request type stuff. And it also gives you a mechanism for like, how many big new enterprise customers can we bring on really, if they're going to have like super, super bespoke requests. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, it also, just looking kind of at the numbers you gave, it gives an indication that you're a very product oriented company, right? Like 85% of it is sort of tactical and strategic product work. 50% of it is like strategic, future visiony product work, and only kind of 15% is the reactive, like, we have this tech debt, or we have to migrate off Heroku, or a customer wants this particular thing, can we just go build this for them? You're trying to not do as much of that and really focus on broadly impacting things that will affect a wide gamut of customers you have today on feature requests, and customers that could be customers tomorrow because of some of the visionary things.
Precisely. Yeah.
That's awesome. I wanted to ask one final question about the company plan, right, that you talked about. I was wondering if you could go a little bit into how it's structured. I think I heard you mention there's like mission, vision, values, and priorities. Because when you originally mentioned the company plan, my mind latched on to like OKRs and a framework, but it sounds like it's a little bit different. Could you maybe go into a little bit more specifics on like how you folks come together to structure it, how you define what goes in it, who do you get buy-in from, and then how you actually roll it out to the whole company?
Yeah. Yeah. The company plan framework is similar to a lot of other similar company plan frameworks. And if anyone has figured out how to cleanly roll it out at every stage of company, let me know. It's always a bit of a scramble for us. But the company plan framework that we've been using is mission, like what is your North Star? Ours is powering the world's contracts. Vision is kind of the how are you going to get there? It's still a long-term vision, but it's maybe the five-year path to getting towards that North Star. Ours is building the products that legal teams love. And then values are how I think of values as a framework for understanding how you ideally want to conduct yourselves. What do you want to scale as your team grows, as your customer base grows, as your business grows? And ours are intent, empathy, drive, and integrity. And again, I think of these less as like the values themselves do matter, but the framework that they present and allowing new teammates to join and join the conversation about what kind of company do we want to be. I think that framework part is the most important part of the values. And then priorities, which change every year. We usually had 4 to 6 priorities as a company at the company level, and then 4 to 6 priorities for each team. And the planning process to create these priorities takes longer and longer the more people you have. We started planning our next year's plan in September, and we're going to roll it out in February. So,
It's like a 6-month almost process to get it defined then.
Yeah. And a part of this is because it's iterative. Like,
right.
Someone needs to come up with the company level priorities. These then need to be like synthesized by each of the teams to understand like how do we achieve these things. And then I've heard it described, and I like the description of it's like solving a multivariate equation in an iterative fashion. As you like take a first pass, you like iterate, and then part of it doesn't work, and so then you have to change the top level because the top level plan because a couple of the teams' numbers and strategies made it not possible to achieve that.
Right.
So you change the company level plan, and then everyone goes back again and replans the team
level. It's almost like gradient descent. Like you're kind of here, and then you go down, and then the one level's not right, so you got to backtrack, and then come back down again.
Exactly. Yeah. But then at the end of the day, the thing that matters the most about the company priorities and the team level priorities is the alignment. Mm-hmm. I like to say, it's not necessarily about picking the optimal direction, and it's about picking a direction that's like good enough and making sure everyone's running in that direction as fast as they can.
Right. That makes a ton of sense. Kai, I realize I don't want to exhaust our listeners. This has been a great conversation. I've learned just a ton around like the importance of one-on-ones, the right times to hire engineering leaders, and kind of frameworks for keeping teams aligned, both through the company plan and through kind of the time budgeting or kind of time allocation that we talked about. Before we wrap up, a question I always love to close is what's your favorite music to kind of work to or get focus around?
Great question. I am a classically trained cellist, so I play cello a lot. I play in orchestras and things. But when I'm working, I'm listening to Korean pop music, so K-pop.
K-pop, nice. Very nice. Well, I also want to ask, what's the best way for people to kind of follow you on social media or follow your work or ideas?
Yeah, LinkedIn is my social media of choice. You can also reach out to me at kai@ironcladhq.com. And I'm also on Twitter
Okay.
at GoGwilt.
GoGwilt. Nice. All right. Well, listen, everyone on our podcast, feel free to follow Kai on LinkedIn or Twitter. Maybe don't email him too much, right? I'm sure you get a lot of email. We'll also include links to all your social channels in the show description below. Kai, again, it's been so great just hearing about your trajectory at Ironclad, and wishing you a ton of success with the company. And I really appreciate your time today in joining us.
Likewise, thank you so much for the conversation. It's been great.
To all of our listeners, thank you to everybody to making it to the end, and thanks everyone for listening. If you have any topics or guests you'd like to see on the show, please send us an email at levelup@opslevel.com, and we'll see everybody next time. Happy building. Bye-bye.